The medieval world was one of contrasts, of light and shadow, of piety and brutality, of grandeur and terror. Amid the towering cathedrals, bustling marketplaces, and quiet villages, a different kind of spectacle unfolded in the public squares. It was a spectacle both feared and celebrated, the execution of the condemned. Today, the very thought of public executions sends a shiver down our spines. But in medieval Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, they were more than punishments. They were public events, social gatherings, and, in some cases, festivals. People came not merely to witness death, but to partake in a ritual that combined justice, morality, and, paradoxically, entertainment. How did such a grim reality become a social spectacle? How did these events reflect the culture, religion, and politics of their time? This is a journey into the heart of medieval public executions, where death became theater and justice was performed before the eyes of the world. In medieval Europe, public executions were as much about deterrence as they were about spectacle. From the grim gallows of England to the notorious marketplaces of France, executions were carefully orchestrated events. The condemned were often paraded through streets, accompanied by priests or executioners, sometimes with drums or horns announcing their arrival. Crowds gathered hours before, occupying every vantage point they could find. For peasants, townsfolk, and even nobles, this was a communal event, a break from daily toil, a lesson in morality, and, for some, an opportunity for morbid entertainment. Vendors sold food, jugglers performed, and musicians played, transforming the square into a temporary fairground. In Paris, the place to grieve became synonymous with executions, drawing crowds that rivaled the city's major festivals. The method of execution often amplified the spectacle. Hanging was common for theft or murder, beheadings reserved for nobility, and burning at the stake employed for heretics. Each method carried symbolic weight, and the ritualized approach reflected the societal hierarchy. Nobles might die swiftly, while commoners endured prolonged suffering. The executioner was both feared and revered, often a local celebrity whose skill ensured that justice and theatricality were delivered with precision. While Europe celebrated executions with fairs, the medieval Islamic world approached the practice differently, but no less publicly. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo witnessed executions in prominent squares, often near mosques, where justice was inseparable from religious and civic life. Public executions in Islamic contexts were intended as moral lessons. Crimes such as murder, theft, or rebellion were punished openly, demonstrating the consequences of violating Sharia law. Yet, these punishments were also theatrical. The condemned might be paraded through the city, sometimes accompanied by recitations of Quranic verses, emphasizing divine justice. One notorious method involved crucifixion or public mutilation, designed to leave a lasting impression on the populace. Chroniclers noted that markets and neighborhoods would halt, with people gathering to witness the enforcement of the law. Vendors and storytellers capitalized on these gatherings, creating a festival-like atmosphere. In the courts of the Mamluks, particularly in Cairo, executions could be elaborate affairs. Noble criminals were sometimes given a ceremonial procession before their death, accompanied by music and officials. Public shaming and corporal punishment were as significant as the final act of execution itself, sending a powerful message about loyalty, crime, and divine order. In medieval China, the concept of execution as public moral instruction was deeply ingrained. Imperial edicts often prescribed public executions for crimes ranging from rebellion to corruption. Crowds gathered outside city gates or along highways to witness these punishments. The Chinese approach emphasized ritual. Confucian ideology shaped how justice was displayed. The goal was not merely to punish, but to educate. Executioners followed strict procedures, and the condemned might be presented with their crimes and confess publicly. This reinforced the moral authority of the state while warning citizens of the consequences of disobedience. Japan, too, had a distinct tradition. During the feudal era, Samurai codes dictated both the method and the spectacle of execution. Decapitation, sometimes by seppuku, ritual suicide, was not only punishment but an opportunity to demonstrate honor, even in death. Public displays reinforced loyalty to the Lord and the social order, turning executions into highly ritualized events that commanded respect and attention. Across Asia, executions were less carnival-like than in Europe, but shared the same communal essence. They were public lessons in obedience, morality, and social hierarchy, often attended by tens of thousands. Crowds observed silently or in reverent attention, understanding that justice was an essential pillar of societal harmony. Why do people flock to these grim events? Anthropologists and historians suggest several reasons. First, executions were a form of social theater, a collective experience where moral boundaries were made visible. Witnessing the punishment of criminals reinforced societal norms, embedding the fear of crime and the authority of rulers. Second, there was a natural human curiosity about mortality and suffering. Medieval society had a different relationship with death. Life was shorter, disease rampant, and mortality a daily reality. Public executions offered a controlled confrontation with death, providing catharsis and fascination. Third, executions created social cohesion. They were moments when communities came together, shared emotions, and collectively observed the enforcement of justice. For poorer townsfolk, these events offered rare entertainment. For elites, they were demonstrations of power and order. Finally, executions blurred the line between punishment and performance. Executioners were skilled artisans of death, choreographing each act with precision. From the timing of the drop to the presentation of the condemned, each detail contributed to the drama. In this way, executions were not only justice, but an expression of cultural artistry, gruesome, yet deliberate. Across Europe, the execution square often became a marketplace of its own. Vendors sold food, drinks, and charms, turning the event into an impromptu festival. Children might be given treats, jugglers entertained the crowd, and musicians performed, creating an eerie contrast between life and death. In France, chroniclers describe executions coinciding with fairs or religious celebrations, amplifying the sense of communal gathering. London's Tyburn Tree became infamous for its executions, drawing crowds who treated the events as social occasions, complete with bets, gossip, and spectacle. Even in the Islamic world, marketplaces often intersected with public punishments. Cairo's streets, for example, would fill with citizens observing the enforcement of law, while vendors sold refreshments and storytellers recounted the crimes, blending morality with entertainment. Asia, while less carnival-like, also saw similar patterns. In China, festivals or official ceremonies might coincide with public executions, amplifying their visibility and impact. In Japan, executions during certain periods were accompanied by ritual observances, emphasizing communal participation and moral reflection. Religion was central to the spectacle of execution. Clergy often attended executions, offering last rites, prayers, or admonitions. In Christian Europe, condemned heretics were expected to confess publicly, illustrating the triumph of the Church. In the Islamic world, Quranic verses and public moral instruction framed executions as divine justice. In Asia, Confucian, Buddhist, and Shinto values shaped both the method and meaning of punishment. Executions reinforced moral lessons, demonstrating the consequences of sin, crime, and rebellion. They were reminders of societal and divine order, warning the living to adhere to laws and codes of conduct. In many ways, they were moral theater, stage for the education and reflection of the community. The executioner occupied a unique place in medieval society. Feared, often reviled, yet essential, these figures were masterful performers. Their tools, axes, swords, ropes, and blades, were instruments not only of punishment but of ceremony. In Europe, executioners trained for years, perfecting the art of a clean beheading or the dramatic spectacle of hanging. Their reputation spread across towns, and some became almost celebrity-like, their presence ensuring that justice was not only done but seen to be done. In the Islamic world, executioners were similarly skilled, adhering to ritualized procedures that balanced terror with religious propriety. In China and Japan, the executioner's role was imbued with moral and spiritual responsibility, ensuring that the condemned's death reinforced societal order. Despite the pageantry and ritual, public executions were not always accepted passively. Crowds could turn violent, expressing anger, dissent, or sympathy for the condemned. In London, Paris, and Baghdad, some executions provoked riots. Executions sometimes became political statements, with rebels or martyrs drawing public sympathy. Authorities had to balance spectacle with control, ensuring that the events reinforced power rather than inciting unrest. This delicate dance shaped how executions were staged, how crowds were managed, and how justice was performed. By the late medieval period, attitudes toward public executions began to shift. Enlightenment thinkers in Europe criticized the spectacle of death, arguing for more private, humane punishments. Governments gradually moved executions behind prison walls, limiting public access. Yet, the legacy of medieval executions survives in literature, art, and cultural memory. Paintings, woodcuts, and chronicles immortalize these events, capturing the drama, terror, and social complexity of life and death in the medieval world. Even in Asia and the Middle East, modernization, changing religious interpretations, and centralization of state power reduced the frequency and spectacle of public executions. The festival-like atmosphere faded, replaced by bureaucratic enforcement of justice. Medieval public executions were more than acts of punishment. They were social rituals, moral lessons, and communal spectacles. From the gallows of London to the squares of Baghdad, the city gates of Beijing, and the feudal courts of Japan, these events reveal a world where death was public, morality was performative, and society gathered to witness justice in its rawest form. They remind us that the line between horror and fascination, education and entertainment, authority and spectacle is never fixed. In the medieval world, death was both inevitable and theatrical, a mirror reflecting the values, fears, and curiosities of those who live alongside it. As we look back, it is tempting to judge, to recoil, and to marvel. But perhaps the enduring lesson of these festivals of death is that human societies, across continents and cultures, have always sought to understand justice, mortality, and the performance of power, sometimes in ways that are as fascinating as they are terrifying.